Once again, a busy afternoon out there in the Atlantic. Hurricane Lee moving north as a Category 2 storm, and Hurricane Margot off on the right-hand side, a high-end Category 1 storm, also moving north. And 15 years ago on this date, Hurricane Ike moved into Galveston Bay. That was a Category 4 storm, although by the time it made landfall, it had weakened to Category 2. We are in the midst of hurricane season and beginning a very gradual decline in oceanic sea surface temperatures. The hurricane risks do not end significantly until mid-November. And the surface map definitely starting to look like fall. We have gotten rid of those very hot temperatures that we had in Texas when it was over 100 degrees just several days ago. And the convective weather has moderated quite a bit also. No slight risks, just a couple of marginal risks around Boston and Hartford, down to the Carolinas, and out there in the southwest deserts. And no heat advisories or excessive heat warnings anywhere to be found. This is a great change, and we're also seeing quite a bit of rain across the country. In the Northeast, we have flood watches in effect across coastal areas from Boston and Manchester down towards New York City. High surf advisories are in effect for Long Island as we get the swells from Hurricane Lee. There's a quick look at the visible satellite imagery showing closed cell cumulus with some vertical development across Quebec and Ontario. All this is associated with cold air advection in the wake of the secluded front and cold front down to the south. As you go south into the Midwest region, it gets more into an open cell character, and this is probably some shortwave energy moving across Indiana this afternoon, and maybe another little surge of instability across the Appalachians. And it is expected to be a cold night in the UP of Michigan and northern Wisconsin as well, down to 36 at Marquette. There are frost advisories for many of those areas there, and that includes the arrowhead of Minnesota as well, Ely, Hibbing, and Grand Marais. The southeastern U.S. also affected by that front, which becomes a little bit more stationary in nature. Heavy rains across Georgia and Alabama this afternoon. Special weather statements have been issued around Columbus, Georgia, over to Troy, Alabama, and down to Andalusia, with winds up to 40 miles an hour and torrential rains. Precipitable waters in that area have been running about 1.75 inches. And there it is. All this purple is between 1.5 and 2 inches of precipitable water, and we get above 2 inches in southern Louisiana down towards the Gulf Coast of Texas. And that area, too, is associated with the tail end of this front and a little bit of isentropic lift, as some of this has characteristics of a warm front. As we go further west, flood watch is in effect for parts of New Mexico, Alamogordo to Truth or Consequences, and in the Sangre de Cristos of New Mexico, where they're expecting about an inch on top of an existing half an inch over a burn scar. Yeah, you can see those storms there out there in the southeastern U.S., but across New Mexico, numerous cells, and you can see by those elongated anvils that there is some shear as well. When we have heavy rains over burn scars like what we have there in the Sangre de Cristos, that's definitely capable of producing enhanced erosion, and that results in mud and debris flows downstream. Plenty of thunderstorm activity to go around all the way from the Front Range of the Rockies back towards the Four Corners area, the Mogollon Rim, and central Nevada as well, as far west as Tonopah. That's where I used to work when I worked at the Nellis Range. That was my first weather assignment way back when. And that region is just ahead of this cold front coming from the Pacific Northwest, and there is a shortwave associated with that as well. So a couple of factors enhancing the lift, along with some enhanced moisture already in place across that region. And there's the West Coast getting a reinforcing shot of cold air, although we're going to see a change going into the later part of this week. By Friday, expecting 99 degrees at Medford, Oregon. Heading up north into Alaska. A Gulf of Alaska system lurking just south of Anchorage. Looks like more monotonous weather in the interior, 30s and 40s, so getting a little bit cool. But we are going to be seeing a series of atmospheric rivers moving into the southeastern part of Alaska. That'll be associated with that occluded system in the Gulf of Alaska. The atmospheric river increases the rain activity in the southeastern Alaska region this evening into tomorrow. Then we get a second shot. This next one is going to be the remains of Invest 93W, which is currently east of Iwo Jima. That gets picked up by the prevailing westerlies and carried into the Gulf of Alaska and southeastern Alaska during the weekend. And then another bit of energy coming into southeastern Alaska for next Thursday. Heading out into Canada, things are cooling down in the Canadian high Arctic. Starting to see those 20s up there, and remember that these are afternoon temperatures, starting to get the snow as well. So we are getting that cool down, and before you know it, we're going to be seeing temperatures down into the teens. Strong occluded system over Baffin Island, cold front across Quebec and Hudson Bay, and we do find a sliver of warm air in northern Manitoba, where temperatures are approaching 70 degrees. And we still do have wildfire smoke from Yellowknife down towards Uranium City into northwestern Saskatchewan, but most of that is remaining north of the Canadian prairies. All right, and the only other Canadian weather we have to worry about is on the East Coast, along with Maine. Lee, which I should show you, let me pan over and get that. That is Lee right there with 95-knot winds, and that's going to be heading north towards Maine and New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. So all these areas here are going to be looking very hazardous as we get into Friday and Saturday. And as far as tropical cyclones, there's the old chessboard. Hurricane Lee, 90 knots, making that a mid-range Category 2 storm. That was Category 5 back on Thursday when it was out in this region here. Also, we have Margot, high-end Category 1 storm moving north. There's the old detrimental effects chart showing the very dry mid-level conditions in brown, the strong shear in blue, and some of this is affected by the hurricane itself, so don't read too much into this. Look at the environment around it and make your assessment. Now, there is some westerly wind shear and some drier air wrapping around from the northwest. So those are going to become increasing influences. And the more positive thing that it has going for it is the proximity to the warmer Gulf Stream waters. And there's a look at the satellite imagery. This is about 3 or 4 hours of infrared, and this shows a bit of a decline in the coldness of those cloud tops, so a little bit of a weakening of the convection in that storm. The digital Dvorak data running steady for about 2 days now, although the last couple of samples show a decline. And there's the Dvorak imagery. It does show a definite center, although the eye wall, which is this stuff right here, is not very cold and not very symmetric. And let's look at that GFS forecast. The GFS has handled this pretty well. What we see here is isobars in black, streamlines in blue, the thickness in red, and the vorticity in shaded browns and reds. The vorticity, just a measure of how disturbed the wind field is, and it also reflects the strength of the wind as well. So you can definitely pick out those disturbances, those tropical cyclones, and areas of disturbed weather like Invest 97L right there. That's probably going to become Nigel. So we don't have to worry too much about Margot. That's going to be out of the picture, but we will watch this, although it will follow the old Franklin track. I guess that's what all these storms are going to be called, the old Franklin track. So let's see what happens. There goes Lee up to the north. We're going to get another look at that momentarily. And there goes what may be Nigel. And where's Bermuda? That's the important thing. That's that little island right there. Now, this could be a factor for them around next Thursday, but that's still quite a ways off. 6 days is like an eternity with these numerical models and more action. So we're not quite over with these disturbances, although this one is tracking a little bit north as well. Let's take a look at that forecast starting Friday morning. As the day wears on, we see the pressure gradient start to increase rapidly on the coast of Maine and Nova Scotia. The center of the circulation approaches the Bay of Fundy, and I know that that's a very vulnerable area for high tides, so I'm not too sure if this is going to have any especially destructive effects in that area, but at the very least, they're going to get high winds and some torrential rains, and certainly some high surf and wave action through there. So the current deterministic GFS track bringing that right up there into the mouth of the Bay of Fundy, and then rapidly weakening as we get that terrain interaction and the lack of a latent heat source. Let's take a look at the European model. This is just going to be the 12Z run, but we carry that through the day, and we've got a track very, very similar to the GFS. So why deviate from that? That's probably about as good as we're going to get in lieu of any new information. Let's check in with our jet stream chart. We're going to be looking at this a lot more as we go into fall and winter, because this is tightly bound up with the kinds of weather patterns we get and the frontal systems which move across the U.S. as well. So how would we describe this? What kind of adjectives? Progressive, blocky, zonal, meridional, split flow? Well, certainly split flow. Look at that right there, kind of a train of strong winds across the southern U.S., another band well up to the north. That's going to be the Maine polar front jet track, and another further up to the north. So that is classic split flow. And this is somewhat of an El Nino pattern as well. When we have these strong, pervasive jets across the southern U.S., that's not directly caused by El Nino, but it's definitely associated with those types of patterns. So we may be seeing more of this as we get into winter, since this is going to be a strong El Nino season. And we'll take a look at the 500 millibar pattern as well. And as a reminder, this is AWIPS. This is the system used in-house by the National Weather Service. We have that here too. So you're getting a kind of an insider look at things. And what do we see here on the 500 millibar chart? This is for right now a trough in the Great Lakes region. That's going to be associated with that cold air advection that I pointed out earlier on that satellite photo. And you can see the colder temperatures aloft. The red isotherms down to -20 from North Bay down towards Cleveland and over to Buffalo. So when you pair that with modest cool air at the surface, not enough to make a dent in the temperatures, but definitely cooler, you're going to get steep lapse rates with that. And as a result, instability and cumulus buildups if you have any source of moisture or any residual moisture there at the surface. And you can see some of that split flow pattern right there. There's one jet and another area where the height contours are bunched up together. So this is certainly a more progressive map than what we've seen over the summer. There's a couple troughs right there, westerly flow throughout the U.S. And let's go into tomorrow. Yeah, upper level high across Oregon. We're going to get those warmer temperatures settle in across much of the northwestern U.S. Temperatures coming up into the 80s and a few 90s in that part of the country. And as we go into Sunday and Monday, we see the ridging expand across the Rockies, and with that, we're going to see a warm-up in that part of the country. Temperatures coming up into the 80s in Montana, and I believe I saw 90 degrees. When was that? Yeah, that was going to be on Sunday. 90 degrees at Billings, and approaching 90 degrees on Monday at Billings as well. Most of the cool weather will be in the eastern U.S. as usual. However, on the west coast, a series of strong troughs will be working on that area Tuesday, Wednesday. Yeah, there's a good one right there. And that one looks pretty potent as we go into next Thursday and Friday. And that's all for this edition of Forecast Lab. As some of you may know, my mother-in-law passed away Sunday morning, so this is kind of a difficult time for the family, but I did take Monday off and we didn't do a show on that day. We did return today. There's not really much going on, but we are still working through that. but I appreciate all your well wishes and comments. Also, many thanks to our Patreon supporters out there. I want to keep mentioning that. Very important to the program. Haven't had any new Patreon supporters in the past couple weeks, but those of you who have supported, thank you very much. And hopefully we can maybe try adding another day to the lineup. I want to try to do that sometime soon, especially with fall weather ramping up. And maybe that'll make it a little bit more worth it to some of you viewers. So anyway, we'll see how that works out. All right, so that's it for me. We'll see you back here on Friday. Have a good one. Bye-bye.